literature-loving friends, I still remember the first time I sat down to watch Fast and Furious Presents. Hobbs Shaw, 2019, a spin-off that felt both familiar and strangely different. At that moment, I had already lived through the wild roller coaster of the main Fast and Furious saga, the gravity-defying cars, the talk of family, the absurd chases that stretched logic to its absolute breaking point. Yet this film promised something else, something more stripped down yet larger than life at the same time. It didn't lean on Dom's speeches or the ensemble family dinners. Instead, it asked us to sit with two men who, in every sense, hated each other and yet were destined to collide and eventually collaborate in ways only fate and Hollywood excess could demand. When the lights dimmed and the opening scenes began, I knew I was not just about to witness another car-centric extravaganza. This one was about personalities. Towering, loud, clashing personalities. Imagine two tectonic plates grinding against each other, refusing to yield, and yet somehow forming mountains. That was Hobbs, the relentless, disciplined lawman built like a fortress, and Shaw, the slick, stylish rogue with a wry grin and a knife always tucked away. It was a buddy film draped in a Fast and Furious brand, but beneath the surface it carried echoes of old literary duels. The reluctant allies of Dostoevsky, the mismatched companions of Cervantes, the bruised antiheroes of Hemingway, and of course, wrapped around them, there was still that sugar rush of modern blockbuster cinema, engines, explosions, and a villain who seemed torn from the pages of science fiction rather than street racing lore. What struck me most in those opening minutes was not the spectacle, though there was plenty, but the rhythm. The film had a rhythm like a pounding workout playlist, alternating beats of humor, hostility, and then bursts of outrageous action. It felt like watching two gladiators in an arena, each refusing to bow, yet bound by the script to fight side by side when the greater monster appeared. That monster, of course, was technology made flesh. Brixton, the cyber-enhanced soldier with a voice that trembled with menace. He was almost mythic, half man, half machine, an echo of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein stitched into the body of Idris Elba. His very presence reminded me how our stories, no matter how modern, always circle back to ancient fears. The fear of what happens when man decides to play God, when flesh is fused with steel, when loyalty is replaced by circuitry. And here, friends, I must confess something. I didn't come into the theater expecting to care. I thought I would chuckle at a few quips, shake my head at impossible stunts, and leave it at that. But cinema, when it wants to, has a way of sneaking past your defenses. I found myself leaning in, watching the way Hobbs glanced at his daughter with that quiet tenderness hidden behind his brute strength. I noticed a subtle pain in Shaw's eyes when his sister appeared, reminding him that his reputation as a scoundrel masked a deeper wound. Suddenly, the film wasn't just noise and spectacle. It was family again, but refracted through different angles, broken pieces of loyalty that still managed to glimmer in the dark. I won't spoil too much here, because the joy of this story is in watching the madness unfold, watching how two men who despise each other learn to bend, just slightly, in order to survive. What I can say is this. The film takes you on a journey that stretches from slick London streets to neon-drenched Moscow hideouts, from CIA black sites to the raw, elemental landscapes of Samoa. And in that final act, when steel and neon give way to ocean and fire, you feel the story has circled back to something primal. It's no longer about who was the fastest car or the sharpest suit. It's about bloodlines, ancestors, sweat, and the courage to fight side by side. That shift, from technology back to roots, from ego to brotherhood, is the heartbeat of the movie, whether you come for the explosions or the quiet moments in between. As I sat there, watching the impossible physics of helicopters chained to trucks, I realized that cinema like this operates on a dream logic. It doesn't ask you to believe. It asks you to surrender to the childlike wonder of what if. What if two men could take down an army with their fists? What if a virus that could destroy humanity was hidden inside the body of a woman who refuses to be broken? What if redemption could be found not in whispered confessions, but in the crash of steel and the roar of engines? These are questions not of realism, but of myth. And myth has always been our way of making sense of chaos. So here's my tease, dear friends. This is not just a film of fists and flames, though you will see both in abundance. It is a tale of reluctant brothers forged in fire, of family bonds tested by shadows, of machines colliding with flesh, and of laughter echoing in the middle of war. It is loud, yes. It is brash, absolutely. But somewhere inside that chaos, if you're willing to look, lies a beating heart that wants you to believe that even enemies can become kin when the world forces them to. That is the journey I invite you on as we step deeper into this review together. Literature-loving friends, let's slip into the film's bloodstream now and trace the story from its opening pulses to the midpoint where everything is still precariously balanced. The characters resisting one another as much as they resist their common enemy. If step one was a wide lens that teased themes and emotions, step two is a slow, deliberate walk to the actual corridors of the narrative, where each door opens to a confrontation, a chase, a revelation, or a laugh at the expense of pride. The early half of this film is built like a duel, where neither warrior wishes to acknowledge that a duel is even happening, because to admit the other man as an equal is already a form of surrender. We begin with a darkness lit only by the hum of technology and the clatter of weapons. A covert MI6 operation is underway, sleek and dangerous, meant to retrieve a viral weapon that could, in the wrong hands, end millions of lives. The agent at the center is Hobbs Shaw, sharp, composed, fearless. She moves with precision, and for a moment we are lulled into believing this mission will succeed with the neatness of a cleanly tied bow. But the film wastes no time in ripping that illusion apart. Enter Brixton Lore, the so-called black Superman, marching with a presence that feels inevitable. He tears through the squad like a myth reborn, bullets bouncing, fist shattering resistance, a smirk written across his face as though pain itself is beneath him. And then the impossible choice lands in Hattie's lap. Inject a virus into her own body to prevent its theft. Suddenly, she transforms from hunter to hunted, a woman carrying inside her veins a countdown to catastrophe. This is where the film's rhythm sets its hook. We cut away from the high-tech violence to the split lives of our two leads. The parallel editing is playful, almost mocking in its contrast. On one side is Luke Hobbs in Los Angeles, dragging his monumental frame through a world of iron, sweat, and tattoos. His morning begins with discipline. Eggs sizzling, weights lifted, a workout that seems more ritual than routine. He looks like a man who refuses to acknowledge the possibility of weakness. On the other side is Deckard Shaw, across the Atlantic, sliding into tailored suits, sipping espresso with elegance, stepping into the London streets like a predator camouflaged in charm. He carries blades instead of dumbbells, sarcasm instead of protein shakes. Yet the effect is the same, a man who radiates control. These two montages, placed side by side, tell us more than dialogue could. They are reflections of archetypes, the warrior brute force and the rogue of sly finesse. Both complete in themselves, both doomed to clash because the world demands their collision. The call comes soon enough. The CIA needs them, though the CIA is less a character here than a stagehand dragging them together with rough ropes. The problem is simple to state and impossible to solve. Recover the virus, neutralize Brixton, and somehow prevent the apocalypse. Hobbs, of course, scoffs when he learns who he must work with. Shaw's name alone provokes an instinctive rejection, rooted in their shared history of mistrust and outright hostility. Shaw, meanwhile, bristles at the thought of sharing space with a man he considers a blunt instrument dressed in under armor. Their first encounter at the CIA briefing room plays like a comedy sketch sharpened into a knife fight. Hobbs calls Shaw Weasel. Shaw fires back with jabs about Hobbs' Neanderthal build. Every word is barbed, every glance a declaration of war. And yet under the surface, we as viewers recognize a formula of reluctant partnership slowly welding itself together. As they set off on their initial investigations, the film gives us sequences designed to underline both difference and inevitability. In one thread, Hobbs storms to an underworld hangout, fists swinging, using bodies as battering rams, leaving chaos in his wake. In the parallel thread, Shaw slides through a nightclub, blades flashing, dispatching enemies with surgical strikes, his suit immaculate even as others collapse around him. Two approaches, two philosophies, one outcome, both effective, both unstoppable. And in that mirror effectiveness lies the seed of grudging respect, though neither man dares admit it aloud. Meanwhile, Brixton emerges not simply as a villain, but as a vision of what humanity could become as stripped of humility. His enhancements are both terrifying and strangely seductive. Eyes that scan like machines, muscles reinforced with steel, a motorcycle that moves as if controlled by thought itself. He hunts Hattie across the city, framing her as a traitor, turning every government agency against her. She becomes a fugitive not only from him, but from the very institutions meant to protect her. Here, the narrative begins layering tension. Hobbs and Shaw may despise each other, but Hattie is Shaw's sister, which pulls family into the equation, and Hobbs, ever the guardian, cannot ignore a woman being cornered. Their paths converge whether they like it or not. The chase across London that follows is both ludicrous and exhilarating, a ballet of engines, fists, and witty insults hurled mid-punch. Hattie proves herself no damsel. She is as fierce as her brother, more resourceful than Hobbs expects, and quick to remind them both that the virus inside her body is not a metaphor, but a literal time bomb. She is the fulcrum on which the story pivots. The reason Shaw cannot walk away, the reason Hobbs cannot treat this as just another assignment. Their arguments swell into physical altercations even as they dodge bullets, the script wringing comedy out of chaos. There is something almost Shakespearean in the way insults fly, as though the film delights in reducing high-stakes espionage to a sibling spat writ large. We reach a crucial turning point when Brixton captures them, dragging them into the headquarters of Ideon, the shadowy organization pulling his strings. Here the film dips briefly into science fiction horror. Machines probing, restraints clamping down, promises of forced conversion into something better than human. It is in these steel corridors that Hobbs and Shaw are forced, for the first time, to fight not beside each other but in sync with each other. Their escape is messy, full of grunts and glares, but it plants the first fragile seed of partnership. They are thrown together not because they choose to be, but because survival leaves no alternative. What makes the first half so intriguing is the constant balance between action and banter, between spectacle and intimacy. Yes, we see cars weaving through traffic, engines screaming, and improbable stunts that defy physics. But between those set pieces are quieter glimpses. Hobbs video calling his daughter, her innocence piercing through his armored exterior. Shaw hesitating when his sister's life hangs in the balance, revealing that behind the smirk is a man weighed down by guilt and responsibility. These glimpses matter, because without them the film would collapse into noise. With them, it becomes a story of flawed men stumbling toward a shared humanity. By the midpoint, we find our trio, Hobbs, Shaw, and Hattie, on the run, hunted across continents, betrayed by governments, pursued by a villain who claims evolution is on his side. The virus remains inside Hattie, its ticking clock louder with every hour. The grudging alliance between Hobbs and Shaw remains brittle, liable to fracture at the slightest provocation. And yet, somewhere in their snarling exchanges, a strange trust has begun to glimmer. The first half ends not with resolution but with acceleration, a sense that the storm is only gathering strength, that the worst is yet to come, and that the fragile rope binding them together may or may not hold. Literature-loving friends, the first half left us with a sense of frantic flight. Our trio pursued mistrusted, carrying both a literal and symbolic virus within them. The second half takes that tension and stretches it across the globe, twisting the chase into something more personal, more primal, and ultimately more revealing. If the first half was a dance of personalities colliding, the second half is about the slow yielding of pride, about discovering that survival depends not only on strength but on humility, on looking another man in the eye and admitting, I cannot do this alone. We rejoin them just as the dust of London has barely settled. Hobbs and Shaw are still bickering like brothers forced into the same cramped room, Hattie caught in the middle, weary of their endless sparring. Yet beneath the sniping there is now urgency. The virus is a timer, and the machine of Ideon is tightening its net. Brixton is no longer just an assassin. He is the face of inevitability, his voice whispering through every surveillance camera, his presence looming in every shadow. To escape him is no longer enough. They must dismantle the power behind him. This is where the story stretches into new geographies, moving from Europe's tight alleyways to Russia's industrial frost. They infiltrate a facility, one of those grim fortresses where steel and ice conspire to strip warmth from bone. The sequences here are among the film's most absurd and entertaining. Hobbs swinging chains like thunderbolts, Shaw manipulating machinery with cunning precision, Hattie ducking and weaving with an elegance that reminds us she is no accessory, but a warrior in her own right. Their mission is to find a way to extract the virus before it matures inside her, to steal the device capable of such delicate science. But of course, Brixton is already waiting. He is everywhere, as though the film wishes to show us that technology, once unleashed, cannot be outrun. The fight here is brutal, almost exhausting, bodies thrown against iron, explosions tearing through cold silence. And yet, even as fists fly, we sense the humor bubbling through. Hobbs mocks Shaw's tiny car choice. Shaw sneers at Hobbs' brute methods. It is a comedy routine wrapped in chaos, and the audience laughs not because the jokes are clever, but because the stakes are so high that laughter becomes a kind of relief. The escape from Russia is one of the turning points of the narrative. They have a device, but Brixton's pursuit leaves them battered, cornered, and nearly broken. In this exhaustion, Hobbs makes a decision that reshapes the trajectory of the film. He takes them home. Home not to Los Angeles or London, but to the place he has avoided for years, Samoa. The shift is radical. One moment we are in frozen warehouses, neon lights flickering on steel. The next, we are bathed in ocean spray, the sky wide and generous, the earth warm beneath bare feet. It is as though the film exhales, moving from mechanical oppression to elemental truth. For Hobbs, this return is not easy. He had been estranged from his family, his brother Jonah in particular, pride and stubbornness having built a wall thicker than any prison. But now, forced by necessity, he returns with a plea: help us fight. These Samoa sequences are, to me, where the film finds its true heart. The Fast and Furious franchise has always spoken of family in grand declarations, but here family is not a slogan. It is a confrontation. Hobbs must face his brother, must admit he needs him, must bow his head and soften his stance. Jonah, resentful and bitter, resists. But blood, in stories like these, has a gravitational pull. Slowly, grudgingly, the bond reforms. And suddenly the stage is set. The final battle will not be in glass towers or icy fortresses, but on ancestral land, with improvised weapons, with chants older than the machines that threaten them. The arrival of Brixton's army is staged like myth. Helicopters darken the skies. Soldiers pour out in disciplined waves. Machines hum with menace. Against them stand men in lava-scarred armor, women with fire in their eyes, brothers and cousins wielding tools turned into weapons. It is a collision not of equals, but of opposites. Technology versus tradition, circuitry versus blood, arrogance versus resilience. The fight that unfolds is absurd in its scale, yet moving in its symbolism. We see Hobbs and Shaw, finally, at last, moving not against each other but in harmony. Hobbs' brute force complements Shaw's precision. Shaw's cunning compensates for Hobbs' bluntness. Together, they become something more than either alone. The film takes its time here, showing us blows exchanged, glances traded, small gestures of respect earned in the furnace of battle. And then comes a set piece that nearly breaks the laws of physics beyond repair. The chain of trucks, the helicopter, the tug of war between machine and muscle. It is ludicrous, of course. No man, no matter how built, can hold down a helicopter by sheer will. And yet, when Hobbs grips that chain, teeth clenched, eyes burning, we believe, not in physics but in myth, not in reality but in the possibility of greatness born from desperation. Myth has never asked to be plausible. It has only asked to be felt. And in that moment, watching Samoan warriors chant, watching Shaw cover his allies, watching Hattie fight for her own survival, we feel something raw and stirring. The climax is not merely spectacle, though it is also the final movement in the symphony of grudging respect. When Hobbs and Shaw face Brixton together in the rain, the film pauses on a revelation. Neither can win alone. Every time one swings, the other must cover. Every time one falters, the other must rise. Brixton, for all his enhancements, cannot adapt to that unity. He is a symbol of isolated strength, of a man rebuilt by wires but stripped of soul. And so he falls, not because he is weak, but because he is alone. It is a lesson as old as literature itself. That true power comes not from domination, but from brotherhood. When the battle ends, when the dust settles and the machines are dragged back into silence, we are left with images that are strangely tender. Hobbs reconciled with his family. The walls of pride finally softened. Shaw standing with his sister, their fractured bond repaired by fire. Hattie alive, her burden lifted, her strength undeniable. Even Hobbs and Shaw, though still mocking one another, share a glance that tells us they have crossed an invisible threshold. They are not friends, not yet, but they are no longer enemies. They are something in between, something stronger than either label. The second half closes not with quiet, but with promise. The threat of Edeon still lingers, a shadow unresolved. The voice behind Brixton remains anonymous, a puppet master waiting in the wings. The virus is neutralized, yes, but the larger war is only postponed. And in that lingering uncertainty, the film does what all stories of reluctant allies must do. It invites us to imagine the future, to believe that this uneasy brotherhood will be tested again, and that next time, perhaps, it will stand not out of necessity, but out of choice. Literature-loving friends, if the first 3 steps carried us through spectacle and storyline, this is where we pause to look closer at the souls moving beneath all the noise. A movie like this could so easily reduce its characters to cardboard cutouts. The muscle, the rogue, the villain, the damsel. And yet, part of what gives a film a pulse is that each figure, however exaggerated, reveals slivers of humanity that echo deeper archetypes in literature. To analyze these characters is to see them not just as vehicles for jokes and punches, but as reflections of timeless roles. The warrior who longs for family, the trickster who hides his pain, the monster who confuses evolution with redemption, and the woman who carries the weight of salvation inside her own body. Let's begin with Luke Hobbs. On the surface, he is almost comic in his solidity. A man carved from stone, shoulders like mountains, fists like hammers. He is the archetypal strongman, the kind of figure ancient myths would describe as half-god, half-human. Yet what makes him compelling is not merely his strength, but the gentleness tucked inside it. Every scene with his daughter cracks open the granite to reveal tenderness, humor, and a desperate desire to protect. He is caught in the paradox so many literary heroes endure, the tension between violence and nurture, between being a shield for the world and the embrace for a child. His estrangement from his brother adds another layer. Pride, that old enemy, has walled him off from his roots, leaving him adrift in a world of constant missions. To see him return to Samoa is to witness the humbling of the warrior, the moment when Achilles removes his armor and admits he cannot live forever in the battlefield. Hobbs is not subtle, but he does not need to be. His arc is written in bold strokes, and sometimes boldness is honesty. Deckard Shaw, by contrast, is all subtlety and slyness. Where Hobbs is a fortress, Shaw is a labyrinth. His every movement is calculated, his every smirk a mask. He belongs to that long tradition of trickster figures in literature, characters who thrive on wit and agility, who disarm enemies with charm before slipping the dagger between the ribs. Yet Shaw is more than just a trickster. His history weighs on him. The shadow of his criminal past, the guilt of family dishonor, the desperate need to prove to his sister that he is more than the monster the world believes him to be. That need defines him. It gives his sarcasm a sharp edge, for sarcasm is often the language of the wounded. Watching him spar verbally with Hobbs is like listening to a man build walls out of jokes, only to have them chipped away by necessity. His growth is subtler than Hobbs, but no less significant. By the film's end, Shaw is not redeemed in some grand, sweeping gesture. He is redeemed in the small look his sister gives him, the nod that says, "I still see you." That, for him, is everything. And then there is Hattie Shaw, perhaps the most surprising figure in the ensemble. She could so easily have been written as a pawn, a woman injected with virus, running for her life, waiting to be saved. But instead, she emerges as one of the strongest presences in the film. She fights not only with skill but with resilience, refusing to let either Hobbs' overprotective instincts or Shaw's eternal guilt reduce her to a side note. In fact, she often outsmarts them both, her resolve steady even as her body carries a ticking apocalypse. She is, in many ways, the moral center of the story. Without her, Hobbs and Shaw would happily tear each other apart. With her, they are forced to look beyond themselves. She represents what literature so often celebrates, the figure who carries within her both fragility and ferocity, The reminder that strength is not only about muscles or weapons, but about the refusal to be defined by victimhood. Hattie is not a device. She is the anchor. And looming over them all is Brixton Lore. His very name carries weight, as though he were already legend. Idris Elba plays him with charisma that blurs the line between menace and magnetism. Brixton is, on the surface, the villain of the piece, a man who betrayed his humanity to become machine, who serves a faceless organization that whispers of evolution through extermination, yet to dismiss him as just another bad guy would be to miss the resonance he carries. Brixton is a cautionary tale, the Frankensteinian figure who mistakes enhancement for transcendence. In literature, he would be the man who sold his soul for power, only to find that power is hollow when divorced from love. What makes him unnerving is not only his strength, but his certainty. He believes, truly believes, that he is the future. And in his certainty lies his tragedy, for he cannot see that the very thing he has surrendered, his humanity, is what makes the future worth having. When he falls not just as a soldier defeated, but as an idea proven false. Technology without heart is death, not life. Around these four orbit smaller, yet meaningful presences. Jonah, Hobbs' brother, is more than just a mechanic with a grudge. He represents the wound of estrangement, the brotherly rift that so many stories hinge upon. His eventual reconciliation with Hobbs is one of the quieter victories of the film, a reminder that not all battles are fought with fists. Hobbs' daughter, too, though given little screen time, is a symbol of innocence that pierces through the cynicism. Her laughter, her belief in her father, transforms him more than any villain could. Even the cameo characters, those quirky agents, those unlikely allies, add texture, reminding us that no story exists in a vacuum, that even in the loudest battles there are voices of humor and absurdity threading through. What binds all these characters together is the theme of reluctant unity. Each one is defined by pride, by independence, by a refusal to lean on others. Hobbs hides behind strength, Shaw behind sarcasm, Hattie behind stoicism, Brixton behind machinery. And yet, the arc of the story is a slow unveiling, a reminder that strength alone is brittle, but strength shared becomes unbreakable. By the time Hobbs and Shaw fight Brixton side by side, their synchronized blows are not just choreography. They are a metaphor for trust forged in fire. By the time Hattie smiles with relief, it is not relief at being saved, but relief at seeing her brother prove himself. By the time Jonah clasps Hobbs' hand, it is not forgiveness of weakness, but recognition of humility. In literature, we often speak of character as destiny. Here, that truth is painted in neon. Hobbs' destiny is to learn that muscle without family is hollow. Shaw's destiny is to learn that wit without loyalty is empty. Hattie's destiny is to show that even the smallest body can carry the weight of the world and still walk unbowed. Brixton's destiny is to reveal that pride without love leads to annihilation. These arcs are exaggerated. Yes, they are wrapped in explosions and wisecracks. But exaggeration has always been one of the tools of myth. Hercules slayed hydras. Odysseus blinded Cyclopes. Gilgamesh sought immortality. Hobbs and Shaw punched cyborgs and chained helicopters. The method changes. The message endures. And so, dear friends, as we step back from the noise, we see the outlines of something more lasting than car chases or skyscraper leaps. We see characters wrestling with the same eternal conflicts that fill our shelves of novels and epics. Pride and humility, estrangement and reconciliation, isolation and community. These characters, larger than life though they are, remind us of our own smaller struggles, the sibling we have not called, the pride that keeps us from apologizing, the fear that asking for help will make us weak. In their absurd battles, we glimpse our own quieter wars. And perhaps that is why we watch and why we care. Literature-loving friends, let's lean back on the plot for a moment and wander into the peculiar corners of this film, the kind of facts, choices, and behind-the-scenes oddities that make you blink twice and wonder how such things ever came to be. Because part of the fun of cinema isn't just watching the finished product flow across the screen, but realizing how much strangeness and serendipity went into its creation. And this movie, believe me, is packed with decisions so strange they almost become poetry. The first strange fact is this: the movie exists at all. By 2019, the Fast and Furious franchise had already run its engines hot for nearly 2 decades. Its main saga was still roaring forward, yet somewhere in the machinery of Hollywood, someone decided to pull out 2 secondary characters. Hobbs, the blunt lawman introduced as an antagonist, and Shaw, the stylish villain turned uneasy ally, and give them an entire world of their own. It is as if Shakespeare had decided to take Mercutio and Tybalt and spin them off into a buddy comedy about espionage and global catastrophe. Odd, risky, maybe unnecessary, and yet somehow irresistible. Studios rarely gamble on side characters. Here they gambled and doubled down with spectacle. Another curious detail is the chemistry, or perhaps anti-chemistry, between Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. Their on-screen bickering feels so authentic because, off-screen, both men were fiercely protective of their images. There are whispers of contracts specifying how many punches each could take, how many times they could be thrown across a room, as though masculinity itself were being measured in choreographed bruises. Imagine 2 actors so unwilling to be bested that the editing had to ensure balance in every fight. That strangeness lends a film a rhythm of its own, where neither man ever truly wins or loses, because both must remain invincible. It is absurd, and yet it creates a symmetry that almost feels mythological. 2 titans locked in eternal equilibrium. The villain, Brixton Lore, carries his own strange lineage. A cyber-enhanced soldier who calls himself the Black Superman. He seems ripped from a comic book rather than a car franchise. And here lies the oddity. The Fast and Furious films had always bent physics, but they had never fully leapt into science fiction. With Brixton, the series crossed a threshold, injecting transhumanism into tire smoke. It is strange not because it doesn't fit, but because it fits too well, as though the series had always been inching towards superheroes disguised as mechanics and thieves. Watching Brixton ride is self-driving. Folding motorcycle feels less like an accident and more like destiny. The final acceptance that this franchise had shed realism long ago. Another fact, Hobbs' journey to Samoa was not just narrative invention, but a deeply personal touch from Johnson himself. He insisted the film showcases Samoan heritage, complete with language, chants, and traditional weaponry. This was not a studio's afterthought. It was an actor's insistence on grounding spectacle in cultural roots. Strange, perhaps, that a Hollywood blockbuster built on nitrous oxide and skyscraper leaps would pause to honor ancestral rituals. But that strangeness is also what gives a film its soul. Few action films risk slowing down to show a family reconciling through shared tradition. Here, amid helicopters and cyber soldiers, we find the rhythm of drums and the power of lineage. Let us not forget the cameos, which almost feel like secret messages slipped under the door. Ryan Reynolds appears as a fast-talking CIA agent, rattling off jokes with the nervous energy of a man who wandered in from a Deadpool set. Kevin Hart pops up as an overly eager air marshal, desperate to be part of the adventure. These appearances are strange because they break the film's rhythm, yet they also feel like sly winks to the audience. Hollywood is smaller than you think, and friendship can sneak into scripts in unexpected ways. To some viewers, these cameos were distracting, but to others, they were delightful ruptures in the fabric of seriousness, as though the film itself were saying, "Don't take me too seriously, I don't." Stranger still are the physics. Of course, the Fast and Furious saga has long abandoned gravity, but Hobbs and Shaw pushes disbelief to such extremes it circles back into wonder. Hobbs gripping a helicopter chain with his bare hands, muscles straining, face grimacing, is not just impossible. It is myth dressed in modern spandex. And the audience, strangely enough, doesn't revolt. We cheer, we laugh, we accept. Because by this point, the franchise has trained us to understand that physics is a suggestion, not a law. This strangeness is not a flaw but a feature. It reminds us that cinema, like literature, thrives on exaggeration. Achilles did not simply fight. He was unstoppable. Odysseus did not simply travel. He outwitted gods. Hobbs does not simply hold a chain. He holds down the sky. Even the virus itself is strange. Hidden not in a vial or a suitcase, but injected directly into Hattie's body, it becomes both plot device and metaphor. It turns her into a walking MacGuffin, pursued not for what she carries, but for what she has become. Strange, too, that the film gives her no weakness because of it. She remains fierce, determined, even playful. The virus never diminishes her. It only sharpens her resolve. One could argue the strangeness is a deliberate subversion. The woman is not weakened by contamination, but empowered by survival. Then there's the matter of the faceless voice behind Ideon, the shadowy organization that controls Brixton. We never see this leader, never learn his identity. He remains a phantom, whispering through computers, promising to return in some future installment. It is strange to build an entire villainous empire and leave its master invisible, but this strangeness serves a purpose. It leaves the story open, dangling, unfinished, as though the film itself were a prologue to battles yet unwritten. In literature, we would call this foreshadowing. In cinema, it feels like franchise building. But either way, it lingers in the mind like a puzzle half-solved. Another strange joy lies in the film's humor. For all its violence and global stakes, it spends enormous energy on jokes. Insults about height, digs about accents, endless riffs about masculinity. These are not sophisticated jokes, yet their sheer persistence makes them strange. How many times can two men call each other names before it grows old? Apparently endlessly. And perhaps that is the point. The humor becomes its own rhythm, like a drumbeat punctuating battle, a reminder that even at the edge of apocalypse, pride still matters. It is absurd, and yet strangely comforting. Finally, perhaps the strangest fact of all is how the film makes us care. By every logical measure, this should be noise. Too many explosions, too much bravado, too little realism. And yet, somewhere between Hobbs reconciling with his brother, Shaw protecting his sister, and Hattie refusing to give in, we find ourselves moved. Strange, isn't it? That a film so drenched in spectacle can still find the quiet moments that pierce the heart. That amid all the strangeness, something recognizably human shines through. So, friends, when I think of Hobbs and Shaw, I think not only of roaring engines and impossible stunts, but of these peculiar details, the contract about punches, the unexpected cameos, the virus inside a body, the culture woven into action, the faceless villain still waiting in the wings. They are strange, yes, but strangeness is often what makes a story endure. Without strangeness, myths would be reports, not legends. And this film, for all its flaws and excesses, knows how to turn strangeness into myth. Literature-loving friends, if ever there was a film that invited polarized interpretations, it is this one. Hobbs and Shaw arrive not simply as another entry in a long-running saga, but as a deliberate experiment. Could two supporting figures shoulder an entire mythos of their own? Critics, audiences, scholars, and casual viewers each seem to see a different movie flickering on the same screen. To some, it was a breath of fresh air, a witty buddy comedy laced with outrageous action. To others, it was bloated excess. The moment the franchise leapt so far beyond its origins that the memory of street racing felt like a ghost. And yet, buried in the reviews and the events surrounding its release, we find a fascinating prism of perspectives, each one refracting a different truth about cinema, spectacle, and the peculiar cultural moment of 2019. Let us begin with the critics. Mainstream reviewers often treat the film as loud entertainment, a popcorn spectacle designed less for analysis than for adrenaline. They praise the banter between Johnson and Statham, noting that their chemistry, equal parts irritation and begrudging respect, carried the film even through its weaker stretches. Some admire the decision to foreground Vanessa Kirby's Hattie as a capable equal, not merely an accessory to male egos. Others, however, found the film exhausting, accusing it of stretching a thin plot over an inflated runtime, substituting scale for substance. Rotten Tomatoes scores hovered in the middling range, reflecting this ambivalence. To many critics, it was fun but forgettable, proof that charisma can carry a movie but not necessarily elevate it. Yet audience reactions told another story. CinemaScore exit polls, box office turnouts, and global enthusiasm suggested that viewers, particularly those already invested in the fast and furious ethos, embraced the film with open arms. The very excess critics mocked was, for many fans, the point. They didn't come for restraint. They came for the absurd joy of seeing a man hold down a helicopter chain with his bare hands. They didn't demand realism. They demanded escalation, and the film delivered. In China, the movie performed especially well. underscoring how global audiences often diverge from Western critical tastes. What some dismiss as overblown nonsense, others embrace as mythic spectacle, and perhaps both were right. From a more literary perspective, the film attracted interesting commentary. Scholars of popular culture noted how Hobbs and Shaw pushed the franchise decisively into superhero territory, blurring the line between action cinema and comic book fantasy. Brixton, the cyber-enhanced villain, was compared to Frankenstein's monster, to cyborg figures of dystopian literature, even to Milton's Satan in his certainty of superiority. Hobbs and Shaw themselves were analyzed as archetypal opposites, the Apollonian force of order and the Dionysian trickster chaos, forced into unity against a mechanized future. Seen this way, the film was not just entertainment but allegory, a tale about humanity resisting dehumanization, about the necessity of brotherhood in the face of technological tyranny. The events surrounding the film's release were equally charged. It arrived in theaters at a moment when the main Fast and Furious franchise was embroiled in internal tensions. Reports of feuds between Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson swirled across tabloids, with whispers that this very spin-off existed in part to separate egos too large to share the same screen. The strangeness of contractual punch counts, the insistence that no star could appear weaker than the other, became gossip fodder as much as cinematic trivia. Thus, when the film premiered, it carried not only the weight of expectation, but the weight of off-screen drama. Audiences weren't just watching Hobbs and Shaw insult each other. They were watching Johnson and Statham assert their dominance in Hollywood's hierarchy. Box office numbers told a story of success, though not unqualified triumph. The film grossed over $750 million worldwide, a staggering sum by most measures, yet lower than the highs reached by the core franchise. Some analysts suggested spin-off fatigue. Others argued that without the full ensemble family, the spectacle lacked emotional weight. And yet, in an era crowded with superhero franchises, the fact that Hobbs and Shaw carved out such space at all was remarkable. It proved that the Fast and Furious brand had elasticity, capable of stretching into subgenres. Buddy comedy, spy thriller, even quasi-sci-fi, without snapping. Another layer of perspective emerged from cultural critics who focused on the Samoa sequences. For them, this was not just an action set piece, but a rare moment when a Hollywood blockbuster foregrounded Polynesian heritage. The use of Samoan language, the depiction of traditional weapons, the ritual chants, all these details, insisted upon by Johnson, resonated with audiences hungry for authentic representation. Some commentators hailed it as a breakthrough, a moment when a mainstream spectacle paused to honor ancestral strength. Others were more cautious, noting the tension between authentic culture and Hollywood spectacle, worrying that ritual could be reduced to exotic flavoring. Yet even within that debate lay a truth. The scene mattered because it existed at all. Representation, imperfect though it may be, opened doors for conversation. The cameos, too, sparked their own micro-events. Ryan Reynolds' appearance delighted some and irritated others. For fans of Deadpool-style humor, his rapid-fire jokes felt like a welcome injection of levity. For others, it shattered immersion, pulling them out of the narrative and into metacomedy. Kevin Hart's cameo divided audiences similarly, raising questions about tone. Were these interruptions delightful bonuses or distracting detours? Perspective split sharply, but perhaps that very split reflects the film's essence. It thrives on excess, on doing too much, on throwing everything at the screen and daring us to sort out. Critics of narrative coherence pointed out another curious detail: the faceless leader of Ideon. By leaving the puppet master unseen, the film created as many frustrations as fascinations. Some saw it as sloppy storytelling, a refusal to commit. Others recognized it as intentional franchise building, a dangling thread meant to weave into future installments. From a mythic perspective, the unseen villain carries resonance. Every epic needs a shadow beyond the shadow, a foe not yet faced. To leave Ideon's master invisible is to acknowledge that this battle is but one chapter in a longer war. Critics who wanted closure missed the point. Those who saw it as setup understood the grammar of franchises. Perhaps the most intriguing critical perspective came not from film scholars, but from philosophers of technology. To them, Brixton was not simply a villain, but a metaphor for our age, a man so integrated with machines that he believed humanity itself obsolete. In an era of AI, gene editing, and transhumanist dreams, Brixton embodied both temptation and terror. His certainty that evolution required erasing weakness mirrored contemporary debates about whether technology will save or replace us. Hobbs and Shaw, by defeating him not through superior gadgets but through cooperation, became symbols of resistance. Humanity surviving not by becoming machine, but by leaning on one another. And so, when we gather all these perspectives, the critic's ambivalence, the audience's joy, the scholar's allegories, the gossip of Hollywood feuds, the cultural pride of Samoa, the debates over cameos, the metaphors of technology, we see not a single film but a constellation. Each viewer projected onto it their own desires, fears, and biases. For some, it was disposable noise. For others, it was myth in modern clothing. For still others, it was cultural representation stitched into blockbuster fabric. That multiplicity is, in itself, the mark of a significant cultural event. Films that pass unnoticed generate little debate. Films that matter, even in messy, uneven ways, spark discourse that outlives the closing credits. Looking back now, I think of how Hobbs and Shaw functioned not just as entertainment, but as a mirror. It mirrored Hollywood's obsession with franchises, mirrored our fascination with technology, mirrored the ongoing cultural hunger for representation, mirrored the human tendency to laugh even when the world is collapsing. Each critical perspective, each audience reaction, is a shard of that mirror. Together they form a fractured but dazzling whole. And perhaps that is the ultimate perspective to carry. The film is not one thing. It is many things at once, joyful and ridiculous, shallow and meaningful, disposable and enduring. It is both loved and mocked, celebrated and dismissed. And isn't that what makes art alive? Not consensus, but conversation. Not agreement, but debate. In its noise, Hobbs and Shaw created a space where voices clashed as fiercely as the characters themselves. And in that clash, something vital was born. Literature-loving friends, to watch a movie is one thing, but to peel back the curtain and study how it was made is another adventure entirely. Hobbs and Shaw may look like effortless bravado on the screen. Men leaping, cars spinning, helicopters chained to trucks. But behind that spectacle lies an intricate web of negotiations, creative decisions, accidents, improvisations, and strange little anecdotes that, when stitched together, form their own story. This is a story of production. How egos shaped action, how cultures were represented, how logistics tested patience, and how fun sometimes peeked through the cracks of chaos. One of the first production truths worth telling is that the film exists because of a fracture. By the time The Fate of the Furious, 2017, wrapped, rumors swirled of tension between Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel. Reports of on-set feuds filled tabloids. Argument about lateness dominance, who controlled the franchise's direction. Whether every detail was true hardly matters, for perception became reality. Universal, sensing both opportunity and necessity, carved out a new lane, a spin-off that would channel Johnson's star power and Statham's rising appeal into a film of their own. In other words, Hobbs and Shaw was born not just a creative vision, but of conflict, a pragmatic solution to an unmanageable rivalry. That origin already lends a movie a meta layer. The film about two men who hate each other was produced because two men behind the scenes couldn't stand each other. Casting Idris Elba as Brixton was another inspired production choice. Elba had long been admired for his gravitas, his ability to radiate menace and charm simultaneously. Yet this role asked him to push into comic book territory. Cybernetic enhancements, superhuman abilities, grand speeches about evolution. Some actors might have resisted such outlandishness. Elba embraced it, leaning into the role with relish. On set, his presence was magnetic. Crew members remarked on how he carried himself like both villain and gentleman, intimidating during takes and warm between them. There's a strange alchemy in watching a man of Shakespearean training shout about being the Black Superman while perched on a futuristic motorcycle. That strangeness, however, was precisely the charm. The Samoan sequences, often praised for their cultural resonance, were not mere set dressing, but the result of Johnson's personal insistence. He lobbied heavily for authenticity, ensuring that language, rituals, and props reflected real Samoan traditions. He wanted chants led by real cultural advisors, weapons that mirrored ancestral tools, and costumes that honored the past rather than caricatured it. Filming these scenes on location brought logistical headaches, weather unpredictability, transporting massive stunt rigs, coordinating hundreds of extras, but Johnson saw it as non-negotiable. For him, it wasn't just spectacle, it was heritage. That passion seeped into Final Cut, giving the climax a grounding that otherwise might have dissolved in CGI excess. Stunts, as always in this franchise, were their own battlefield. The motorcycle chases in London required months of choreography, with stunt doubles rehearsing routines that resembled ballet as much as combat. Brixton's bike, designed to fold and slide under trucks, was largely CGI, but the stuntmen still had to replicate as much practical motion as possible. Johnson and Statham, famously competitive, often pushed themselves to perform their own fights, though insurance companies kept a close leash on just how far they could go. Interestingly, behind the camera, there was meticulous accounting of who hit whom, who got thrown, who walked away triumphant. Their contracts reportedly specified not only stunt safety but stunt parity. Neither man could be seen to lose too often. Imagine the producers counting punches like accountants tallying coins. The result is an oddly balanced choreography where fights never feel decisively won, only paused. Another fascinating production note: the humor was often improvised. Johnson and Statham riffed endlessly between takes, their insults sometimes crafted on the spot, other times whispered to them by crew members who thought up new digs. Ryan Reynolds' cameo dialogue, unsurprisingly, was almost entirely ad-libbed. The same is true for Kevin Hart, whose eagerness as an air marshal came from his real-life friendship with Johnson. Much of the performance was simply Hart being Hart. These improvisations lent the film its looseness, the sense that even amid global catastrophe, laughter bubbled uncontrollably. Filming across multiple countries brought headaches of its own. London, with its dense streets, demanded elaborate closures and night shoots. Glasgow doubled for London in some chase sequences, allowing greater control. Russia's icy facility was recreated on sound stages, where stunt coordinators could manipulate explosions without endangering cast. Samoa required delicate cooperation with local authorities, who both celebrated and scrutinized production. Each shift of location was like shifting genres: London sleekness, Russian coldness, Samoan warmth. The crew often joked that they were making 3 different films stitched into one. The production timeline itself was intense. Principal photography began in late 2018, racing to hit a summer 2019 release. Director David Leitch, known for John Wick and Deadpool 2, brought his signature blend of kinetic action and self-aware humor. His background as a stuntman colored every decision. He insisted that fight choreography should be clear, that the camera should capture bodies in motion rather than drowning them in edits. The result is a film where punches land with weight, where brawls are exhausting to watch because they're exhausting to perform. Crew members spoke of nights where rehearsals stretched until dawn, actors bruised but determined to push further. And yet, amid all this intensity, there were moments of levity. Johnson was known to bring Samoan food to set, sharing meals with cast and crew. Statham, quieter off camera, surprised many by cracking dry jokes between takes, his humor understated but sharp. Vanessa, Kirby, in interviews, recall how the two men treated her as both sister and sparring partner, teasing her but also respecting her toughness. Idris Elba, meanwhile, reportedly DJ'd at rap parties, turning production stress into dance floor release. These little fun facts remind us that behind the steel and fire of the movie, there were real people building camaraderie. Marketing was another production dimension. The studio leaned heavily on the buddy comedy angle, cutting trailers that highlighted insults as much as explosions. The decision to reveal much of the plot in trailers, Hattie's infection, Brixton's enhancements, even the Samoa showdown, was controversial. Some fans complained that surprises were spoiled. The studio defended itself, arguing that audiences came for the how, not the what. Whether wise or not, it reflected Hollywood's current strategy: sell spectacle up front, trust that charisma will fill seats regardless of spoilers. The box office story became part of production lore too. The film grossed more than $750 million worldwide, a staggering figure by most measures, though slightly below the franchise's mainline entries. Analysts debated whether it justified further spin-offs. Some argued it proved the franchise's elasticity. Others warned of dilution. But within production circles, the number was celebrated as triumph, especially given the gamble of stepping outside the family. For Johnson and Statham, it cemented their status as bankable action anchors independent of Diesel's orbit. Another fun tidbit: the film's post-credit sequences were added late, designed to tease further adventures and deepen comedic beats. Reynolds, again, stole scenes in these snippets, bantering about tattoos and conspiracies. Hart, too, returned, insisting on his place in future missions. These additions turned the film into a seedbed for potential sequels, even if those sequels remain unannounced. If we step back, the production story reads almost like a parable. Out of conflict was born creation. Out of egos emerged balance. Out of logistical headaches blossomed cultural representation. Out of improvisation came laughter. And out of relentless scheduling came a finished product that, however excessive, carried its own charm. So the next time you watch Hobbs grip a helicopter chain or Shaw slip into a sleek car chase, remember that behind those images were producers counting punches, actors improvising insults, cultural advisors choreographing chants, and crews working through nights in foreign cities. Cinema is always more than it seems. On screen it is myth, off screen it is labor, negotiation, and sometimes joy. And perhaps that blend, myth on screen, mess behind the curtain, is what makes Hobbs and Shaw not just a movie, but an event worth remembering. Literature-loving friends, one of the most rewarding ways to revisit a film like Hobbs and Shaw is to slow down and examine its geography, its textures, the palette of colors and sounds that create its mood. Settings in cinema are never neutral backdrops. They are characters in their own right, silent but forceful presences shaping tone, guiding emotion, and carving meaning out of spectacle. This film, though it sometimes feels like three different movies spliced together, takes us across a patchwork of landscapes. The steel corridors of London and Russia, the neon haze of technology, and finally the primal sunlight of Samoa. Each shift in setting is not just visual variety, but thematic movement. It is the story itself speaking in the language of place. Let's start with London, where much of the early chase and espionage unfolds. Cinematically, London here is not romantic cobblestone, but industrial pulse. The camera lingers on bridges, glass skyscrapers, rain-polished streets glowing under headlights. It is a world of sleek surfaces, reflecting both the cold precision of Shaw's personality and the technological menace embodied by Brixton. The fight sequences in nightclubs and alleyways are shot with quick cuts, saturated in neon purples and blues. London becomes a maze, tight, unforgiving, stylish yet dangerous. Watching Shaw glide through it feels natural, as though the city itself bends to his rhythm. For Hobbs, by contrast, London is a cage too small for his bulk, a place where his brute force shatters elegant surfaces. Thus, the setting amplifies the contrast between the men. Shaw the fox in his den, Hobbs the lion pacing too close to fragile walls. Then there is Russia, or rather, the Russia conjured on sound stages and location doubles. Its imagery is cold, mechanical, relentless. Industrial facilities loom like prisons, their walls scarred with frost, their interiors humming with machines. The cinematography here emphasizes steel gray and pale blue, colors that drain warmth from frame. This is Brixton's natural habitat, the environment of a man who has surrendered to machinery. The choreography in these spaces is brutal, full of echoes and reverberations. Each punch lands like a hammer on metal. Each explosion glows like fire against ice. Russia, in this sense, becomes a metaphor for dehumanization, for the chilling embrace of technology unchecked by soul. When Hobbs and Shaw fight their way through these corridors, they are not just escaping. They are clawing humanity out of cold steel. And then, at the climax, the film shifts with almost jarring suddenness to Samoa. The difference is so stark it feels like stepping into a different genre entirely. Gone are the muted blues and grays. In their place floods sunlight, ocean spray, lush greens, and the warmth of earth. Samoa is not presented as postcard paradise, but as ancestral ground, a place where chants rise with the wind and family bonds shape destiny. Cinematographically, the framing widens here. We see horizons, we see skies, we see bodies framed against elemental landscapes. Action slows, stretches, breathes. The fire of torches replaces the hum of neon. The palette shifts to reds, oranges, and deep browns, the colors of blood, tradition, and roots. For Hobbs, this is not just setting but soul. The land itself demands his reconciliation, both with his brother and with the pride that once severed him. Samoa is more than backdrop. It is redemption materialized as geography. Across these settings, the film also plays with contrast in cinematic technique. Director David Leitch brings his stuntman's eye to every fight, ensuring the camera lingers just long enough to let us feel impact. Wide shots during chases emphasize speed and geography. Tight close-ups during brawls force us into intimacy with sweat and bruises. The editing rhythm is calibrated like a drumbeat. Quick bursts, then pauses, then another flurry. Humor punctuates action like rests in a symphony. And the sound design, oh, the sound, turns every setting into sensory immersion. In London, the hum of engines echoes against slick surfaces. In Russia, metallic clangs and mechanical drones dominate. In Samoa, drums and chants pulse through the air, grounding battle in tradition rather than circuitry. Cinematography also plays with light. In urban settings, light comes from artificial sources. Neon signs, flickering monitors, headlamps slicing through fog. It feels alien, imposed, fragile. In Samoa, light is natural. Sun through clouds, firelight at dusk, stars overhead. That shift is not accidental. It visually encodes a thematic journey from artificiality to authenticity, from pride in machines to humility in heritage. The final battle, staged in rain under a rising sun, fuses both elements, nature and technology, chaos and rebirth. Hobbs and Shaw, once divided, are lit equally, side by side, drenched but unbroken. The cinematography here is not subtle, but it is powerful. Color, too, deserves attention. The film deliberately saturates urban scenes with cold palettes and Samoa with warm palettes. The villains are always cloaked in blacks and silvers, evoking machinery. Hattie often wears muted but strong tones, olive greens, deep blues, that underline her role as grounded anchor. Hobbs, in many scenes, is dressed in earthy tones, while Shaw prefers sleek grays and blacks, mirroring their approaches. Costume, in other words, speaks character, reinforcing without words who these people are. And when the Samoan warriors march with painted faces, glowing in torchlight, the film explodes into vibrancy. It is no longer subtle but celebratory. Let us also speak of the vehicles. Cars, of course, are always central in this franchise, but here they become more symbolic than practical. Shaw sports cars gleam like extensions of his elegance, sleek, controlled, stylish. Hobbs prefers trucks, massive machines built for raw power. Their chase sequences highlight this contrast, each vehicle a mirror of its driver. Brixton's motorcycle, meanwhile, is the strangest of all, a futuristic beast that bends, folds, and moves almost as if it were alive. It is a cyborg in vehicle form, a companion to his altered body. The vehicles are not just props. They are embodiments of identity. Watching them crash, skid, or soar feels like watching characters argue without words. Soundtrack choices complement these elements. Hip-hop, rock, and Polynesian chants weave together, sometimes clashing, sometimes harmonizing. The music underscores contrast as much as unity. When the Samoan battle begins, drums drown out machinery. When London chases roar, electronic beats pulse like adrenaline. This layering of sound gives a film texture, reminding us that settings are not only seen but heard, not only surfaces but atmospheres. Even smaller cinematic elements carry meaning. The use of slow motion at critical moments, the pause before impact, the held breath before explosion, turn stunts into mythic gestures. The frequent over-the-shoulder shots during arguments remind us of perspective. We are always caught between Hobbs and Shaw, looking past one to see the other. The symmetrical framing in fight scenes emphasizes parody, echoing the contractual quality behind the scenes. These choices may pass unnoticed consciously, but they shape experience subconsciously, guiding us to feel balance, to sense inevitability, to recognize that the story is about duality slowly bending into unity. In the end, The settings and cinematic elements of Hobbs and Shaw are not scattered decoration, but deliberate architecture. London embodies sleek hostility. Russia embodies mechanical oppression. Samoa embodies ancestral redemption. Vehicles embody personality. Colors embody theme. Light embodies truth. Sound embodies rhythm. Together they form a journey from artificiality to authenticity, from division to union. And as we watch, we may laugh at the absurd physics, but beneath our laugh the cinematic language whispers something older. That place shapes soul. That land remembers that light matters. Literature-loving friends, when the lights go down in the theater, what we see feels seamless. Fists connecting, cars vaulting, helicopters dangling over cliffs. But behind the curtain, the creation of a spectacle like Hobbs and Shaw is anything but seamless. It is a messy tapestry of egos, negotiations, late-night rewrites, exhausted crews, stunts rehearsed to the point of bruises, and sparks of joy that remind us why people endure such chaos at all. To explore the behind-the-scenes world of this film is to discover a parallel narrative, one where power dynamics and human quirks shape the myth just as much as scripts and cameras. Let's begin with the most whispered fact of all, the feud. By 2019, the Fast and Furious family was no longer as harmonious as it appeared on screen. Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson were reported to be at odds. Disagreements over punctuality, controlled production, and the very ethos of the franchise. Johnson's social media posts hinted at frustrations with unnamed male co-stars, calling some candy asses. It was never officially confirmed whom he meant, but speculation fueled tabloids like wildfire. Into this climate stepped Universal Pictures, a studio unwilling to lose the star-powered Johnson, but wary of fracturing the main saga. The solution? A spin-off, carefully carved to spotlight Johnson and Jason Statham, while sidestepping Diesel entirely. Thus, Hobbs and Shaw was born not out of pure creative inspiration, but out of Hollywood conflict management. Off-screen rivalry became on-screen rivalry, turned into a commodity that audiences would buy tickets to watch. Jason Statham, though less vocal publicly, was equally protective of his image. Both he and Johnson had reputations as invincible action stars. Their contracts reportedly included stipulations about fight outcomes. Neither could appear weaker than the other. Producers and stunt coordinators were instructed to count punches, balance blows, ensure that falls were evenly distributed. Imagine the absurdity. Spreadsheets tracking bruises, negotiations over who slams into a wall and who gets the final kick. Crew members joked that it was like refereeing a boxing match, where the outcome had to be declared a draw every round. Yet this obsession with equality shaped the film's rhythm. Every confrontation between Hobbs and Shaw feels perpetually unresolved, a perpetual tug-of-war that mirrors their real-life competitiveness. Director David Leitch brought his own history to the set. A former stuntman and co-director John Wick, he valued clarity in action. He insisted that fight choreography be designed not just for spectacle but for readability. Audiences should feel every punch, not be lost in a blur of edits. His stunt background earned him respect from crews. He spoke their language, understood their injuries, valued their craft. Under his direction, fight sequences were rehearsed like ballets. Each move timed, each blow practiced until rhythm and impact aligned. Yet Leitch also encouraged improvisation, particularly in humor. He trusted Johnson and Statham to riff, to insult each other freely, to find sparks of comedy in exhaustion. The result is that much of what feels natural on screen, snide comments mid-punch, rolling eyes during explosions, was born in the moment, not the script. Vanessa Kirby, stepping into the role of Hattie Shaw, later recalled how daunting it felt to hold her own between two giants of charisma. Johnson teased her relentlessly. Statham offered dry wit as counterbalance. Yet both respected her toughness. On set, she performed many of her own stunts, determined not to be overshadowed. Kirby described days of bruises and exhaustion, but also pride in proving that Hattie was not a token but a force. Behind the scenes, she became the glue, often diffusing tension with humor, reminding the men that the story's heart was not their rivalry but her resilience. Idris Elba, meanwhile, was a unifying presence. Crew members spoke of his professionalism, his ability to shift from chilling menace in front of the camera to warm laughter behind it. Offset, he sometimes DJ'd gatherings, filling nights with music, turning stress into release. He reportedly embraced the outlandishness of his role, delighting in lines about being the Black Superman. His willingness to dive into absurdity gave permission for others to lean into the ridiculous joy of the film. Elba's villainy was rehearsed meticulously. Stunt doubles trained to move in sync with his mechanical precision, while VFX teams studied his motions frame by frame to integrate digital enhancements. Behind the camera, he was as much collaborator as actor, often suggesting small tweaks to choreography that would make Brixton feel more machine than man. The Samoa sequences were perhaps the most personal behind-the-scenes chapter. Johnson pushed for authenticity, hiring cultural advisors, insisting that Samoan language and chants be included. He wanted audiences to see not caricature, but pride. Production faced challenges, transporting heavy stunt rigs to remote locations, coordinating hundreds of extras, battling unpredictable weather. Crew members described torrential rains that halted filming, equipment sinking into mud, schedules thrown into disarray. Yet Johnson's determination never wavered. For him, these scenes were not just spectacle, they were homage. The chants filmed in the climax were rehearsed with real cultural leaders, their rhythm echoing across the set, sending shivers even through jaded crew. Many later recalled that those moments, when tradition filled the air, were the most moving of the entire shoot. Off camera, Johnson reconnected with family members during production, making the work deeply personal. Of course, not everything was harmonious. The logistics of international filming stretched budgets and patience. London required night shoots and street closures, angering residents. Glasgow doubled for some chase scenes, but even there, navigating traffic control became a nightmare. Russian facilities were largely sets, but cold temperatures and stage explosions created safety concerns. Stunt teams often rehearsed in secrecy, away from prying press, determined to keep surprises intact. Injuries were inevitable. Crew members took hits, stunt doubles endured falls, but safety protocols minimized catastrophes. Still, the wear and tear on bodies was immense, a hidden cost behind every adrenaline rush. The cameos, too, tell their own behind-the-scenes story. Ryan Reynolds' participation came from his friendship with Johnson. Scheduling conflicts limited his time, so his scenes were shot quickly, with dialogue improvised in bursts of manic energy. Kevin Hart's cameo emerged almost spontaneously. Johnson invited him. Scripts were hastily adjusted, and within days Hart was filming. These appearances were not carefully plotted but born from relationships, reflecting how Hollywood often runs on personal connections more than formal planning. Crew members laughed about how suddenly entire scenes were reshaped simply because Johnson's friends dropped by. Editing was another battlefield. With so many stunts, improvisations, and cameos, the first cuts ran long. The challenge was balancing spectacle with pacing. Leitch fought to preserve clarity, while producers pushed for faster rhythms. Test screenings shaped the final edit. Jokes extended where audiences laughed, action tightened where they grew restless. The final film still stretched over 2 hours, but insiders whispered that early versions were even longer. Whole subplots reportedly disappeared, trimmed to keep focus on the trio of Hobbs, Shaw, and Hattie. Marketing also shaped behind-the-scenes choices. Studios demanded trailers that showcased the most outrageous stunts, spoiling some surprises. Johnson disagreed privately, preferring to hold back the helicopter sequence. But market research ruled otherwise. Audiences, they argued, came for escalation, and escalation must be sold. These tensions highlight how films are not just art, but product, balanced between creative vision and financial calculus. Perhaps the most charming behind-the-scenes detail is how much laughter punctuated the labor. Crew members recalled Johnson leading impromptu push-up contests during breaks. Statham rolled his eyes, but eventually joining in. Kirby once challenged stuntmen to races across sets, her competitiveness delighting the team. Elba's DJ nights became legendary, moments where exhaustion melted into joy. Even amid bruises, even amid contractual disputes, there were flashes of camaraderie that kept spirits alive. Cinema, after all, is built not only on tension but on shared humanity. So when we watch Hobbs and Shaw unfold, with its improbable stunts and larger-than-life egos, it helps to remember that behind the screen was an equally dramatic tale. Feuds and friendships contracts and chance, improvisations and injuries. Each left fingerprints on the final cut. Behind the myth of invincible men were ordinary people negotiating pride, fatigue, and laughter. And maybe that is the greatest behind-the-scenes insight, that the film about reluctant allies was itself forged by reluctant allies, stitched together not by harmony, but by the messy, human act of collaboration. Literature-loving friends, at first glance Hobbs and Shaw might look like a noisy carnival of stunts, jokes, and impossible physics. But beneath the fireworks beats the ancient heart of storytelling, archetypal themes, old as epics, dressed in modern steel and neon. To trace these themes is to uncover the deeper resonance of film often dismissed as spectacle, yet pulsing with symbolism that connects to myths, literature, and the quiet struggles of our own lives. Let us start with duality and reluctant unity. Hobbs and Shaw are opposites incarnate. One massive, the other lean. One blunt, the other sly. One rooted in family, the other estranged by guilt. Their conflict is not merely personal, but symbolic of larger dualities. Order versus chaos, brawn versus cunning, tradition versus modernity. The entire film revolves around the slow collapse of these boundaries, the realization that survival depends not on individual supremacy, but on collaboration. Every insult, every punch, every begrudging nod is a movement in the symphony of reluctant brotherhood. By the final act, when they face Brixton together in rain and mud, their synchronized fighting becomes more than choreography. It becomes a visual metaphor for unity transcending difference. Closely tied to this is the theme of family and reconciliation. Fast and Furious films have always repeated the mantra of family, but here it is refracted into personal wounds. Hobbs' estrangement from his Samoan kin mirrors the rift with his brother Jonah. Shaw's need to redeem himself and his sister's eyes mirrors his own self-loathing. Family here is not easy comfort. It is estrangement, pride, distance. The Samoa sequences turn this into living symbolism. The ancestral land becomes a ground where wounds must be healed. The chants, the torches, the return to blood ties are more than action set pieces. They are ritual acts of reconciliation. Even Hattie, carrying the virus within her, becomes a symbol of family as burden and salvation. She is both victim and anchor, reminding Shaw who he once was and forcing Hobbs to treat her as more than collateral. The third theme is technology versus humanity. Brixton lore, the cyber-enhanced soldier, is more than villain. He is allegory. His body is fused with machinery. His eyes skin like cameras. His motorcycle responds like a living extension. He believes evolution demands the erasure of weakness, the replacement of flesh with circuits. He is a Frankenstein monster updated for the 21st century, a warning against transhumanist hubris. Opposed to him stand Hobbs and Shaw, flawed, bruised, stubborn, but defiantly human. Their victory over him is symbolic. Technology without humanity collapses. In literature, this is a theme stretching back to Prometheus, to Shelley, to dystopias where man forgets his soul. Here, amid explosions, the lesson is the same. Machines cannot replace heart, nor wires replace loyalty. Then comes pride and humility. Both Hobbs and Shaw begin the film drowning in pride. Hobbs believes brute force can solve anything. Shaw believes cunning excuses all betrayals. Their rivalry is pride personified. The film's arc is about humbling. Hobbs returning to his brother with lowered head. Shaw admitting his guilt to Hattie, both conceding that alone they are insufficient. Pride isolates. Humility unites. The helicopter sequence, absurd as it is, becomes metaphorical. Hobbs alone cannot hold the chain. Shaw must grip beside him. Unity is born of humility. In this way, the film speaks not just of action heroes, but of us. How many quarrels in our lives fester because pride bars apology? The virus inside Hattie functions as potent symbolism. Literally, it is a world-ending weapon, but metaphorically, it is embodiment of vulnerability carried within strength. Hattie, though fierce, is pursued because of what she holds. Yet the film refuses to reduce her to weakness. Instead, she becomes symbol of resilience. She carries death inside her and still fights, still mocks, still stands unbowed. The virus is also narrative mirror of family burdens. Each character carries invisible wounds, unseen infections of guilt and estrangement. Extraction is not just medical but emotional. Healing requires facing what festers inside. The theme of heritage and roots is powerfully symbolized in Samoa. The land itself becomes a character, representing return, grounding, authenticity. In London and Russia, characters fight with machines and gadgets. In Samoa, they fight with spears, chants, and fire. Technology is stripped away. The past rises to meet the future. This symbolizes not regression but integration, acknowledging that true strength comes from roots. Johnson's insistence on Samoan representation turns spectacle into cultural hymn. In literary terms, Samoa is the locus of Minas, the fertile place of healing, the symbolic garden where reconciliation occurs. There's also humor as survival, the endless insults, the comedic cameos, the jokes at moment of crisis. These are not random but thematic. Humor is how characters cope with chaos, how they assert control over the uncontrollable. In literature, tricksters use humor to deflate power. Shaw's sarcasm is trickster energy. Hobbs' blunt mockery is warrior humor. Even Reynolds and Hart in their cameos embody this theme, absurdity invading apocalypse, reminding us that laughter is as human as fear. Symbolically, humor becomes resistance. Machines may crush bodies, but they cannot extinguish mockery. Brixton's fall carries its own symbolism. He is defeated not by superior force, but by teamwork. Symbolically, this is the collapse of the ideology of isolation. He is literally switched off by his unseen master. His humanity erased, his usefulness ended. It is chilling metaphor. Those who surrender humanity for machinery become disposable tools. Brixton's death is not just villain's end. It is warning. Symbolism whispers here. Beware the seduction of power that strips your soul. Even the vehicles are symbolic. Shaw's sleek cars are extensions of elegance and control. Hobbs' trucks are metaphors of brute stability. Their chase sequences become symbolic debates. Precision versus force. Brixton's motorcycle, folding and reforming, is symbol of hybrid monstrosity. Machine almost alive, too perfect, too unnatural. When these vehicles clash, symbolism is not subtle. Identity itself collides. Lighting and color symbolism deepen the film. Urban settings bathe in neon blues and purples. Symbol of artificiality, coldness, estrangement. Samoa blazes with reds, oranges, natural sunlight. Symbol of warmth, authenticity, reconciliation. Even costumes echo symbolism. Hobbs in earthy tones, Shaw in sleek blacks, Hattie in muted strength, Brixton in metallic menace. Visual symbolism whispers meaning even when dialogue shouts jokes. And let us not forget sacrifice and redemption. Hattie risks her life to carry the virus. Shaw risks exposure to redeem his sister's trust. Hobbs risks pride to reconcile with his brother. Each character sacrifices something intangible, reputation, ego, isolation, for the possibility of redemption. Symbolically, this ties the film to myths of heroes who must shed old skins to be reborn. Finally, the faceless Ideon leader symbolizes unseen power. By leaving him invisible, the film turns him into archetype, the shadow behind the shadow, the puppet master whose anonymity makes him more terrifying. He is a symbol of systemic evil, power that cannot be punched because it has no face. In literature, villains unseen often represent fate itself, the inexorable force still waiting. Here, he represents the future, unwritten, ominous, a battle deferred. So when we strip away the noise, we find a web of themes: unity, family, technology, pride, heritage, humor, sacrifice, unseen power. Symbolism threads through every punch and every chase. And this is why the film resonates more than it should. Beneath the helicopter chains and neon car chases lies something ancient. The story of brothers learning humility, of families healing estrangement, of humanity resisting machines, of pride yielding to roots. Explosions entertain, but symbolism lingers. Literature-loving friends, one of the joys of stepping behind the shimmering curtain of cinema is realizing how many invisible choices shape what we take for granted on screen. Every camera angle, every sound effect, every cut in the editing room is a decision made in service of rhythm, spectacle, and emotion. Hobbs and Shaw may appear at first as a sprawling action romp, but beneath the roar lies a carefully engineered machine of technique. And then, once the artistry was woven, came the equally complex saga of how it performed in the world of numbers. the box office battlefield, where dreams are measured in dollars and global appeal becomes a true test of survival. Let's begin with the filmmaking itself. Director David Leitch approached the project with his stuntman philosophy: clarity, impact, flow. Having co-directed John Wick and guided Atomic Blonde, Leitch was known for fight choreography that reads like dance. In Hobbs Shaw, he translated this ethos into a franchise known for excess, rather than quick-cut chaos. Many fight sequences are staged with medium and wide shots, allowing us to track bodies in motion. When Hobbs smashes through enemies in a warehouse, or when Shaw dispatches a line of thugs with precision, the camera lingers just long enough for us to savor rhythm. It's not realism. Physics is still bent, but it's clarity. We feel punches land. We sense momentum. We register geography. Cinematography plays its own role in sculpting identity. Urban London scenes are shot with high contrast, neon light reflecting on slick pavement, echoing spy thrillers. Russian facility scenes lean into industrial coldness, harsh whites and grays, swallowing characters. Samoa, by contrast, bursts into warm natural hues, wide frames capturing expanses of ocean and sky. The visual grammar here is deliberate, cold artificiality versus warm authenticity. Even the rain-soaked final fight, staged in dawn light, fuses these contrasts, natural cleansing water colliding with mechanized violence, sunlight breaking through storm. Symbolically, the visual choices echo the themes of humanity, reclaiming primacy over machines. Sound design and music are equally meticulous. Composer Tyler Bates stitched together a soundtrack of hard rock riffs, electronic beats, and Polynesian drums. Each location has its own sonic vocabulary. London pulses with electronic bass. Russia reverberates with mechanical drones. Samoa sings with chants and percussion. Sound is not background. It is atmosphere. In fight scenes, punches are exaggerated sonically to become percussion. Cars revving are tuned to resonate like chords. When Hobbs and Shaw argue mid-battle, the mix balances dialogue against explosions so that humor punctuates without vanishing. Sound here is sculpted narrative. Editing is another invisible craft. The rhythm of the film mimics Banner itself. Fast, biting, relentless. Action is intercut with quips, stunts with insults. Editors Chris Dickens and Paul Mocklis juggled hours of footage, balancing contractual parity between Johnson and Statham. Their cuts ensure neither man dominates. Both shine, both fall, both rise. It's a strange form of symmetry, almost mathematical. Every blow Hobbs lands is countered by a Shaw flourish. Every insult Shaw delivers is offset by Hobbs' glare. The editing rhythm thus mirrors the thematic rhythm of duality. The visual effect deserve mention, too. Brixton's enhancements required layers of CGI, from glowing spinal reinforcements to his motorcycle's uncanny agility. VFX teams studied Elba's movements, overlaying digital flourishes to make him both man and machine. The helicopter truck sequence, a climax of impossible physics, was built from a blend of practical rigs and digital stitches. Trucks were chained together on location. Helicopters were simulated with partial props. Digital layers filled gaps. The sequence demanded not realism, but plausibility of myth. Audiences didn't believe physics. They believed feeling. And that is the artistry of VFX, selling impossibility as inevitability. Now, the box office story. Released in August 2019, Hobbs and Shaw entered a crowded landscape. Superhero films dominated screens. Audiences were accustomed to billion-dollar juggernauts. Yet the spin-off carved its place. Domestically in the United States, it grossed around $173 million. Not record-breaking, but respectable. Globally, however, it soared to over $750 million. International audiences, particularly in China, embraced it with enthusiasm. In fact, more than two-thirds of its revenue came from overseas markets, proving once again that franchises today are global myths tailored for cross-cultural consumption. Critics noted the disparity. While domestic numbers were solid but unspectacular, the film's overseas performance cemented its profitability. China alone contributed over $200 million, a staggering reminder that Hollywood blockbusters are now calibrated as much for Shanghai as for Los Angeles. Action transcends language. Humor Surprisingly, does too. The banter between Hobbs and Shaw, though rooted in British and American sarcasm, resonated globally because mockery is universal. In Samoa, chants were subtitled yet felt viscerally even without translation. The box office thus reflected not just spectacle, but universality of archetypes. From a budgetary perspective, the film cost around $200 million to produce, with marketing adding perhaps another $100 million. By grossing $750 million, it cleared profitability, though not at the astronomical levels of mainline Fast and Furious entries, which have crossed the billion mark. Analysts debated whether it justified sequels. Some argued yes. It proved Johnson and Statham could anchor without Diesel, broadening the brand. Others argued no. Spin-offs risked diluting the saga, siphoning momentum from core entries. Universal remained coy, teasing possibilities but never announcing sequels outright. Critically, the film sat in middling territory. Praise for charisma, criticism for bloat. Rotten Tomatoes hovered around 67% approval. Metacritic averaged 60. Yet audience scores were higher, reflecting the divergence between critics' fatigue and fans' joy. Cinema Score graded it A-, proof that those who bought tickets left satisfied. Box office legs confirmed this. Word of mouth carried it through weeks, even as critics groaned about length. Awards were never the goal, but technical craft drew some nods. Stunt teams were lauded within industry circles, though not formally recognized at Oscars. Tyler Bates' score earned modest praise. Yet the true reward lay in audience embrace. Cosplay of Samoan warriors at conventions, memes of Hobbs holding the helicopter chain, fans quoting insults like scripture. Box office is not only numbers, it is cultural footprint, and by that measure, the film succeeded. From a filmmaking analysis standpoint, the techniques tell a story of balance. Wide shots for clarity, editing for parody, color palettes for thematic contrast, soundscapes for atmosphere, VFX for myth. Each choice reinforced themes: duality, heritage, humanity versus machine. Box office then confirmed the resonance. Audiences across continents responded not only to spectacle but to the archetypes encoded within. Perhaps the most interesting takeaway is how cinema today operates on two fronts. On screen, we witness myth dressed as action. Off-screen, studios monitor spreadsheets of grosses, territories, demographics. Art and commerce dance together, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes harmoniously. Hobbs and Shaw embodies this dance. It is a film shaped by egos and contracts, yes, but also by genuine craft and cultural homage. Its box office story is one of success measured not against billion-dollar titans, but against expectations of spin-off survival. And so, when we revisit this film, let us not only recall helicopter chains and insults, but also the artistry of Leitch's framing, the rhythm of editing, the roar of sound design. Let us remember how audiences worldwide filled theaters, laughing, gasping, clapping, proving that spectacle still binds strangers together. Numbers tell one story, but techniques tell another. Together, they form a fuller picture. A film that may not have shattered records, but did carve its place in the mythic machinery of global cinema. Literature-loving friends, the screen gives us performances, but it lies behind those performances. Their voices and interviews, their off-screen quirks, the responses of audiences scattered across the world, compose another narrative entirely. Hobbs and Shaw was not only about Hobbs, Shaw, Hattie, and Brixton. It was about the actors who carried them, the conversations they sparked, and the audiences who responded with laughter, critique, and sometimes surprising tenderness. Let us wander into those reflections, listening to the voices that shaped and received the film. Dwayne Johnson, towering and charismatic, spoke often about how personal this project was for him. In interviews, he described Hobbs as a character who carried echoes of his own life, protective, stubborn, proud of heritage, sometimes estranged from family but yearning for reconciliation. What moved him most, he confessed, was the chance to bring Samoa into Hollywood's spotlight. Johnson pushed hard for authenticity, insisting that Samoan language, chants, and rituals be central to the final act. He admitted that while holding a helicopter chain may have been pure fantasy, leading a Samoan chant with brothers and cousins around him was real, grounding, almost spiritual. Audiences in Polynesia echoed that sentiment, flooding social media with gratitude for representation. One could sense in his interviews the merging of star persona and ancestral son, the action hero and the cultural ambassador bound together. Jason Statham, by contrast, revealed himself in interviews as wry, understated, pragmatic. He spoke of Shaw not as a fantasy, but as a man haunted by guilt, desperately trying to prove himself worthy in his sister's eyes. Statham admitted he enjoyed the banter most, the chance to play comedy against Johnson's brawn. In British press, he reflected on how Shaw was both villain and hero, trickster and brother, a role that allowed him to lean into contradictions. Fans appreciated his restraint. While Johnson filled interviews with enthusiasm, Statham's dry humor became its own charm. Viewers noted how his sarcasm on screen mirrored his off-screen wit, never flamboyant, but sharp enough to leave marks. Vanessa Kirby, relatively new to blockbuster territory after her lauded performance in The Crown, embraced the role of Hattie with equal parts trepidation and joy. In interviews, she recounted bruises from stunts, laughter between takes, the challenge of standing tall between two giants. Yet she also emphasized how vital it was to craft Hattie as more than a pawn. She spoke of demanding agency, of ensuring Hattie fought, strategized, and mocked as fiercely as her male counterparts. Female fans particularly resonated with her portrayal, sending messages of appreciation for a character who carried vulnerability and strength without collapsing into stereotype. Kirby often smiled in interviews when asked about Johnson and Statham, describing them as big brothers who teased relentlessly, yet always made space for her. Idris Elba, in press circuits, seemed to relish the role of Brixton. He called him the most fun villain I've ever played, noting how liberating it felt to exaggerate menace into almost comic book proportions. He compared Brixton's certainty in his superiority to Shakespearean villains, citing Richard III as inspiration. Elba laughed about shouting Black Superman on set, admitting it was both absurd and glorious. Audience reviews often singled him out as the film's highlight, praising his gravitas even when dialogue verged on the ridiculous. Many critics wrote that Elba elevated the role, turning what could have been a caricature into a magnetic presence. Fans online joked they wanted a spin-off just for him, half serious in their admiration. Cameo actors Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Hart also made waves. Reynolds, riffing in his signature style, improvised dialogue that audiences either adored or despised. Some reviewers praised his energy, saying it injected levity into slower stretches. Others groaned that it broke immersion. In interviews, Reynolds admitted he barely rehearsed, treating the cameo like playground mischief. Kevin Hart, meanwhile, delighted in recounting how his role came almost overnight, a phone call from Johnson turning into a day on set. Audience reactions were similarly divided. Some saw it as gratuitous, others as delightful. Yet in both cases, the cameos sparked conversation, proving memorable if nothing else. Audience reviews as a whole painted a fascinating spectrum. On one end, fans gush about nonstop fun, praising chemistry, humor, and spectacle. They called it a roller coaster worth every ticket, the funniest Fast and Furious yet, proof Johnson and Statham could anchor anything. On the other end, detractors sighed at length, complaining of bloated runtime, implausible physics, and endless jokes. They called it a cartoon with muscles, fun for 15 minutes, exhausting after 2 hours. Yet even among critics, praise for Vanessa Kirby and Idris Elba stood out, acknowledged almost universally as fresh sparks. Global responses carried nuance. In China, where the film grossed over $200 million, reviews often highlighted spectacle as triumph. Audiences there celebrated the helicopter sequence, the motorcycle stunts, the scale of destruction. In Polynesia, responses centered on pride and representation. Social media filled with emotional posts about seeing Samoan chants and weapons honored. In the West, humor sparked most commentary. Some adored the sarcasm, others rolled their eyes. This divergence reflected not only taste but culture. Different regions resonated with different aspects, proving again that blockbusters succeed by offering multiple entry points. One intriguing thread in audience discussions was how children perceived the film. Parents reported kids imitating chants, quoting insults, pretending to hold helicopters. Younger viewers embraced the absurdity without complaint. For them, impossibility was charm. Adults, by contrast, debated plausibility, sometimes missing the point that plausibility was never offered. This generational split mirrors literature, too. Myth always delights children with dragons, while adults argue over wingspan and fire temperature. Hobbs and Shaw thus function as modern myth, appealing most purely to those willing to surrender disbelief. Behind the press smiles, subtle dynamics emerged. Johnson and Statham gave interviews separately more often than together, fueling whispers of lingering rivalry. Yet in joint appearances, their mockery continued, often blurring line between performance and reality. Audiences sensed authenticity in their irritation, which paradoxically made chemistry stronger. Kirby often played mediator in interviews, laughing at their antics, softening tension. Elba, calm and collected, projected balance, anchoring chaos. These dynamics mirrored the film itself. Rivalry, mediation, balance. Life imitated art. Art imitated life. Audience reviews on aggregator sites reflected this balance too. IMDb scores hovered in the 6.5 to 7 range, respectable but not legendary. Letterboxd reviews range from sarcastic praise, cinema peak when Hobbs held a helicopter, to genuine admiration for representation. Social media memes immortalize the most absurd sequences, transforming critique into affection. A film mocked for defying physics became love precisely for that defiance. Audiences, even critical ones, could not resist sharing clips, gifs, quotes. In that sharing, affection grew. Ultimately, the cast interviews and the audience's responses wove together a chorus: admiration for charisma, skepticism of bloat, joy in representation, laughter at absurdity. Each voice added dimension. Critics may have dismissed, fans may have cheered, but all engaged. And engagement is the truest sign of cultural impact. So, when we think of this film, let's remember not only helicopter chains and car chases, but Johnson's pride in Samoa, Statham's dry wit, Kirby's bruised determination, Elba's Shakespearean villainy, Reynolds' mischief, heart spontaneity. Let's remember audiences across continents, some clapping, some groaning, some laughing, some rolling eyes, but all reacting, all stirred. For in the end, cinema lives not in perfection, but in response. And Hobbs and Shaw lived loudly. Literature-loving friends, we have journeyed far together through the labyrinth of this film. From the opening images of covert missions and clashing egos, through neon London and icy Russia, into fiery ancestral embrace of Samoa, we've traced every thread this spin-off dared to weave. We've listened to Hobbs and Shaw bicker like children and fight like titans. We've watched Hattie carry death in her veins with grace. We've seen Brixton rise like a machine god only to be broken by the stubborn humanity of his foes. We've looked behind the camera at feuds, contracts, improvisations, and cultural pride. We've listened to critics sigh, audiences cheer, scholars search for allegory, children delight in impossible feats. And now, as the credits roll in our minds, it's time to gather all these fragments into one reflection, one closing act of memory. At its heart, Hobbs and Shaw is a story of opposites forced into union. Its loudest theme is duality. Two men who embody difference so completely that they cannot stand each other, yet whose survival demands trust. This is an old story. Gilgamesh and Enkidu wrestling into brotherhood, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza fumbling into mutual dependence, Holmes and Watson binding intellect with heart. The film, for all its modern CGI, is simply another retelling of that eternal truth. Strength is not in the individual, but in the bond forged under fire. When Hobbs finally lowers his head to reconcile with his brother, when Shaw finally earns his sister's forgiveness, when the two of them finally fight in rhythm instead of rivalry, we see myth written again in muscle and wit. The settings and visuals remind us of another truth. That place shaped soul. London's slick surfaces echo Shaw's elegance and duplicity. Russia's cold industrial fortresses echo Brixton's mechanizing humanity. Samoa's sunlight and chants echo Hobbs' roots and reconciliation. The geography of the film is symbolic geography. Each location a stage where inner conflicts manifest in outer landscapes. By ending in Samoa, the film tells us that authenticity, ancestry, and reconciliation matter more than gadgets or skyscrapers. Technology may shimmer, but tradition endures. The characters themselves are archetypes wrapped in quirks. Hobbs is the fortress with a tender core, the warrior who must remember family. Shaw is the trickster haunted by guilt, the rogue who longs for redemption. Hattie is the anchor, the woman who proves that carrying vulnerability does not erase agency. Brixton is a cautionary tale, the man who mistook machinery for immortality. Each plays out a symbolic role recognizable across centuries of literature. And yet, because they are embodied by actors of charisma, Johnson's warmth, Statham's wit, Kirby's steel, Elba's gravitas, they become more than archetypes. They become companions on a journey we willingly join, however absurd the physics. Behind the scenes, the story doubles itself. Just as Hobbs and Shaw feuded into reluctant alliance, so too did actors and producers negotiate egos into collaboration. Just as family bonds healed on screen, Johnson brought his real Samoan heritage into the fabric of the film. Just as Brixton embodied the dangers of technology without soul, the VFX teams balanced CGI with practical stunts to preserve weight and clarity. Cinema imitated life. Life imitated cinema. The myth extended beyond screen into gossip columns, press tours, cultural debates. And then came the audience, the final author of meaning. Some laughed with joy, others sighed with fatigue, but all reacted. Children clapped at impossible stunts. Polynesian communities felt pride at ancestral representation. Chinese audiences thrilled at spectacle. Critics debated excess. The film was never invisible. Love it or mock it, people talked, shared, memed, remembered. Cultural impact is not measured only in awards or reviews, but in resonance. And this film, however messy, resonated. So, what do we take from it, friends? Perhaps that cinema need not always aspire to subtlety to matter. Sometimes myth is loud. Sometimes allegory is wrapped in helicopters and explosions. Hobbs and Shaw reminds us that even blockbusters of bravado can carry whispers of themes we know by heart. Unity after division, reconciliation after pride, humanity after hubris, laughter amid chaos. It tells us that culture can slip into spectacle, ancestral chants into action set pieces, and still stir something deep. It shows us that absurdity and sincerity are not enemies but partners, that even while we laugh at impossible stunts, part of us thrills to the myth they embody. As I close this long reflection, I find myself thinking not of explosions but of a smaller image, Hobbs' daughter laughing his gruffness, Shaw glancing at his sister with relief, Samoan warriors chanting as dawn breaks. These are the images that endure when noise fades. They remind us why we return to cinema, not for realism, but for resonance, not for plausibility, but for possibility, not for silence, but for the chorus of voices, characters, actors, critics, audiences, all speaking at once. And so, literature-loving friends, thank you for journeying with me through this film. If you enjoyed this long wandering through explosions, myths, humor, and heritage, stay with me here at Cinema Vault. There are more films to unravel, more myths hidden in neon and steel, more laughter and reflection to share together. Like, subscribe, and join me again, for cinema is a library, and together we can keep turning its pages.